If I were to summarize it, your job as a product manager is to deliver the right product to the right users, to solve the right problems at the right time. Now, your role is very contextual because you will focus on different parts of that statement, depending on the founders, the stage of life of the company, which industry it is, and everything else. And I think there are some core functional skill sets that you can't run away from, and you must have it. But I don't think there is a cookie cutter template on this is what you must do to succeed in product management.
Welcome to Analyse Asia, the premier podcast dedicated to dissecting the pulse of business technology and media in Asia. I'm Bernard Leong, and product management is not just aligning with stakeholders and bringing together teams with different perspectives into one single frame of reference, which is the product that customers use. With me today, I have a friend, old friend, Isaac Tay, to share his war stories and talk about product management and even stand-up comedy. And of course, this came about because during my digital transformation class, and he gave a very good talk about product management. That's why I wanted him to be on the show. So Isaac, welcome to the show.
Bernard, thank you for having me on. It's an honor to finally join you on this podcast, and thank you for the kind words about the session that you invited me. Maybe just an introduction for everyone on the podcast. My name is Isaac Tay. I am currently the VP of Product at Shopback. So Shopback is an online and offline rewards platform. We help our users discover the best deals, and when they buy from our merchant partners, they get rewards such as cashback. We are currently in 12 markets. Actually, our co-founder just announced that we've soft launched in New Zealand, so that was a 12th market. So yeah, we're in 12 markets. Yeah.
Wow. So there's a plug, and basically the rest of the conversation we will be talking about Shopback, right?
Well, the rest of the conversation will focus on product management. Yeah.
Correct. But of course, do check out Shopback as well. I'm a user as well. So maybe as always, all traditional starts of the Analyse Asia podcast, the first question I always ask for origin story. There was some intertwine between us in this origin story. How do you start your career?
That's an interesting question. So I studied software engineering, or rather computer engineering at NUS. And when I graduated, I started working for what you would call a system integrator. So we were employed by one company, but we were seconded to other companies to work on their projects. And I worked for two such companies over the span of 4 years. At that time, and this was, I think, 2006 to 2010, around that period of time. I'm not sure whether, Bernard, you remember, but the industry in Singapore was very nascent. I think we didn't have the abundance of tech companies like we have today, right? We didn't have Google, didn't have Facebook here. Some of these companies were not even founded yet, or they haven't really expanded out of their origin country. So system integrators and consulting companies were the places where you absorb software engineering folks at that time. And that was that. Then I'm sure you're very familiar, the Singapore government tried to stimulate the growth of the digital industry in Singapore, right? And then you had NRF. Right. They encourage funds to come in and everything else. And so there was a groundswell also. I think a lot of folks were organizing bar camps, hackathons. And so around that time, 4 years into my career, I decided like, you know what, hey, I want to try to be part of this growth. So I left my job and then started my own company to see how can I participate in this, either through building software as a service or a consumer-facing product. So it started there. Then Bernard and I met. Bernard, he founded SG Entrepreneurs, which was, I think, the first online publisher in Singapore covering entrepreneurship and tech news. And they were promoting IDA, I think, or IMDA at that time, one of the events. And they sent a marketing message out, and I think a bunch of us told you, I was one of them.
About the message. That one was, I think at that point in time was the Infocom Development Authority. Today is the IMDA. They were trying to do an incubation fund. So part of that was when we had that, I was trying to solve a market need of having a media platform on at that point in time. I didn't see it that way because on there, and then subsequently that eventually was sold to Tech in Asia in 2014. And recently we all collected our exit money when Tech in Asia got acquired by SPH. But let's get back to the story. So we intertwined, and then what do you do after that?
Right. So after that, so my co-founder and I, for my first company, we basically started doing consultancy work. We started out wanting to build a product. And to be honest, at that time, as first-time founders, we were fairly, I would say, noob, and we didn't really know how to raise funds, do customer acquisition. And so in the end, the product that we wanted to build didn't really take off. But what we ended up doing was doing consulting work using the product that we had built, right? So what happens is the product that we had built was generalized and extensible enough to solve some of our clients' needs. And so we ended up doing consulting. 3 years into this journey, my co-founder and I look at each other and say, we didn't want to start a consulting company because that was the job that we came up from, right? We were doing that kind of work and we didn't really want to do that. And on hindsight, actually, it shouldn't have been a surprise that our company evolved to that because we didn't really know at that time when we first started, we didn't really have any good mentor models, at least in Singapore for us, right? On how a tech company will look like. And a lot of other folks, to their credit, managed to figure it out, right? But for us, we were very stuck on this is how a tech company runs. And I guess that's how we ended up as a consultancy. We decided like, hey, you know what, let's close off our client projects. It's not like we are not earning money. We can sustain ourselves, but this is not what we wanted. And so we decided to close off our client projects and then we closed down the company. After that, I was introduced by a mutual friend, and I'm not sure whether he would want his name to be mentioned on this podcast, but he introduced me to my last co-founder, was the CEO of Honestbee, Joel, and he introduced us. And from there, Joel and I started a working relationship, which led to the founding of the second company, which was Honestbee, which in its heyday did grocery and food delivery in 8 markets. There was a third co-founder, Jonathan, and I'm sure you know him. So Jonathan and I met at a hackathon at NUS. I think it was NUS. Yeah, it was a hackathon at NUS. And so then I put him in to join us in the Honestbee journey. And in 2019, the company closed down. I left in 2018. You could ask a bit more questions about my learning lessons there, but basically at the end of 2018, I left because Normal Story founder disagreement didn't agree in the direction of the company. And then I left. Yeah, I'm gonna pause here. Maybe you have any questions about this phase before I reach.
And then subsequently you went on a journey to do stand-up comedy, I think for almost half a year, right? You traveled around Europe.
I would say 4 months. 4 months. So what I did was I traveled from Singapore to London just using buses and trains, predominantly trains.
Land travel.
So what happened was the basic rule was only decide on what you're going to do next when you enter into the current country, right? So I would go into Phnom Penh and then decided whether I wanted to continue staying. If not, then I'll just buy a bus ticket, move on to Vietnam. Then from Vietnam, just keep going. The only part of the trip that really had to be planned, because you needed a visa to enter. So you had to go into Russia at a specific point in time. If not, you couldn't because you have to pre-apply. But the Singapore passport actually is amazing. You could really show up at the borders of most countries and say, hey, can I enter? And they will give you a visa that allows you to be there for quite a generous amount of time. And because of that, I was able to travel all the way up from Singapore to KL, to Bangkok, to Cambodia, to Vietnam, to China, to Russia, to Estonia, all the way up to London by land. And then along the way, I just performed stand-up comedy. Yeah.
Okay. And then you come back and then now you're with Shopback. Is that how the story goes?
Yes. In the condensed version. Yes.
But let's get back to this. Like, right, for over this decade, you've seen the rise and maybe now currently in what I call the winter funding stage of the Southeast Asia startup ecosystem. What are the lessons on your career journey that you can share with my audience?
I think since we were talking about product management, I'll zoom in on that. I've come to realize is that product management is extremely contextual. And a lot of folks can have the same title, product manager, and we can say we're doing the same kind of work, right? Product management. But it really depends on the company. It really depends on the industry that the company is in, the customers they are serving. And so it really depends on the founders and the stage of life. And then the product management work that you do is very contextual. If I were to summarize it, your job as a product manager is to deliver the right product to the right users, to solve the right problems at the right time. Now, your role is very contextual because you will focus on different parts of that statement, depending on the founders, the stage of life of the company, which industry it is, and everything else. And I think there are some core functional skill sets that you can't run away from, and you must have it. But I don't think there is a cookie cutter template on this is what you must do to succeed in product management. That's something that I've observed.
This is a good reflection on what product management is from what you learned from your career journey. So I'll come to the main subject of the day, which is we can talk about war stories, product management, and maybe even stand-up comedy if we have the time. But I want to start off first from the war stories part of the conversation. You talk about yourself as a co-founder of a startup with Honestbee, I think Jonathan and Joel. Jonathan today is now a YC alum running his startup called ajourney.com. Yeah, and so I wanted to get your point of view. Can you just talk about the history of Honestbee and how it eventually collapsed, but from your point of view?
The precursor, the company before Honestbee, it was this company called LiveOp. And it's a combination of two words, right? The word life and opportunities. And it started out with a sense that we were asking ourselves whether we could do more for the folks who cannot find economic opportunities via LinkedIn. And there is a segment of the Singapore workforce, or the workforce in general, that can't, right? And in other markets, there were platforms trying to solve it. So there was TaskRabbit, which was, like Task, right? And then there was which was focused on really on drivers. So in Singapore, we thought whether we could try something. And so we built a generalized platform to try to be the LinkedIn for non-white collar workers. So we call it Life. Over time, we realized that was probably not the right approach, and because we couldn't get traction to build like a social network for non-white collar workers, right? Like a LinkedIn for non-white collar workers. So we iterated on a few ideas. To be honest, Honestbee was our last Hail Mary. If the POC that we did for Honestbee didn't work out, I don't know whether as a team we might have any energy to do many other things. To be honest, Honestbee at that time when it started, it wasn't a new idea. Card was already in the US. We were just wondering whether we could bring something similar into Singapore, right? And I think it's important to note at that time, RedMart, which was like, I think the OG of online grocery delivery, had already educated the market in Singapore about what it means to order your groceries online and get it, right? And so it's just that the distribution model, the logistics model was slightly different, right? RedMart had their own warehouse. They took inventory and they delivered out of it. Instacart wasn't like that. And so we did a POC. Like the original POC was actually food delivery. Ironically, it wasn't grocery delivery. We wanted to see whether people would do food delivery in Singapore around the Raffles area. So, I think the idea was on a Wednesday night. By Friday, we were giving out flyers at Raffles Place. People were picking it up, then WhatsApping us and say they wanted to order this, order that. We got the delivery. We went to buy the food, then delivered to them, and realized, hey, there was some amount of traction just by giving out flyers. And we wondered whether we could take it further. We did, which is why Honestbee was born and grew. Yeah. But we started out with grocery delivery first rather than food at that time. Yeah. Because
And then how does this subsequently evolve? I think you raised quite a lot of money and then subsequently it also collapsed.
Right. We started out from Singapore and then we moved out to a few other markets. In total, there were 8 markets. And to be honest, we tried a lot of verticals. In the end, I would say the 2 core verticals was food and grocery. And in 2018, just 1 year before Honestbee died, we launched Habitat, which was like a online to offline retail concept. It was a physical space where you could get your groceries and everything. If you ask me what was the reason why we died, and I won't go into the governance issues because those are well covered in the press, right? So I'll go on more about like the building of a company beyond the governance issue. We lost focus too fast. In my opinion, we lost focus too fast. We diversified into too many different business units without clearly having one business unit. And it's not easy when you do that, regardless of the amount of funds that you have. This is a very funny story, and a lot of people may not believe this, but there was a period of time when we had very strong user base for food and a period of time when we had very strong user base for groceries. When we did qualitative interviews with our users, the grocery users didn't know we had food delivery, and the food delivery users didn't know we had grocery delivery. And it was really interesting because when you open up the app, food and grocery delivery icons were side by side, and you had to really choose grocery to go into the grocery screen. And for food, it was similar, and it was very interesting. And you start realizing that cross-selling is not as easy as you think it is. When once someone knows you and build a relationship with your company, sometimes it gets anchored into that. What I've noticed is it's not like seamless to cross them over to say, oh, okay, Honestbee now does both grocery and food in their minds. So then there's this whole idea of how do I get lower customer acquisition costs, increase my LTV if I can't even do this cross-selling. Yeah, so that was interesting. Yeah, so I'm gonna pause here. I think we ended too fast.
So I think lack of focus and then subsequently the collapse. I think those are pretty well documented. Now, if I were to ask you now, if I can reverse time back to the founding of the company and redo this again, what would you have done differently?
Well, that's a great question. I think we should have dominated more in groceries in Singapore and a few other markets first, before expanding out even into more markets and into other verticals. I think that was something that we should have done. I'm not sure whether you know familiar with the timelines, but there was a period of time where RedMart got acquired, right? And then the parent company, the company that acquired RedMart got acquired again by even like one of the biggest tech companies in the world, right? And RedMart really had the best UI UX. Like their technical team was amazing, and they really through UI UX solve a lot of amazing problems to support lowering their cost of delivery, like nudging people to book certain time slots and everything else. They had a very nice user experience. Over time, through the different acquisitions, the experience got diminished. The RedMart brand got subsumed. I think those periods when the competitor was maybe making a mistake and everything else was a time which we have doubled down on groceries in Singapore, rather than get distracted and think that the war was won and expand into other different business units. So just for example, I think we could have doubled down and really cemented our position with certain key metrics, right? Like customer acquisition, retention, average cart size, and LTV. And I think we could have doubled down on that first. I think we had a playbook on how to expand into other markets, or rather to launch into other markets, but we couldn't execute the playbook like clockwork. So if you think about a well-performing sports team, everyone has tactics, right? And sometimes you can execute the tactic on a basketball court well, but if you can't do it consistently, I'm not sure whether your company or your team truly understands the tactic, right? And so when's the right time to use one or two tactics? If you only have one, the opponent knows how to respond to that. And so we had a playbook. I don't think we knew it as well as we thought we did, and clearly we didn't execute it well. So I think if once we have gotten those two things better, then that's when we started expanding out from Singapore more, or expanding our footprint into other markets, and maybe going into different business units. So this was I would say the two big things that I would have done.
Yeah. One question that comes out after this experience is maybe it's just being focused and double down into what you're really good at and figure that out. What usually happens with a lot of startups is a lot of startup founders tries to expand themselves as too quickly, overexpanded, and hence they missed what makes them unique. Your experience highlighted that. So now I want to flip the switch now to product management, because I think one thing does commonly go across the different conversations we have is about product management. Maybe the first question I want to start off is, can you discuss, like, say, where you have a challenging project that you worked on to navigate the different complexities? Because I think product management is something like that. There's always a period of time where you're trying to figure out what works for everyone. I think that the experience about you have two icons next to each other and yet people don't know about it is a pretty good way of thinking about even cross-selling can be as simple as that, but yet people do not even see that.
This question or this direction is actually a really great one. And I want to maybe revisit one point that you mentioned. I think a big part of being successful, there's obviously a lot of hindsight bias, is to really understand what was your core unique value proposition, or rather your strategic approach. What was unique about your strategic approach and your thesis, and be confident in it and don't change from it so fast. And I'll give you an example by what I mean by that. In 2018, Honestbee launched the O2O habitat, right? Online to offline retail. We started taking our own inventory. The experience was great. You see on Instagram lots of great photos. People enjoyed the food there. The groceries were really top notch. But our company started with the thesis of not holding inventory. The thesis that we believe in is that the Instacart model was an interesting model that works, where you work with partners like the big chains like Cold Storage or NTUC. NTUC was our main partner. Let them focus on the inventory, right? Let them focus on the building the distribution through their actual stores, right? And then we go in and pick it up, and then we charge a delivery fee or a service fee to our users for the extra convenience, right? Instead of them having to drive down and take a public transport, we do it for them, and then we charge a fee to the grocery stores because we're like doing marketing for them, and because we are paying at the store, we increase the earnings per store, which in their way of thinking about accounts, right? Earning per store is what matters. And they also have a marketing budget to increase earnings per store. And you could consider us as the marketing arm for that, right? Digital marketing arm for that. At that time, when we shifted to O2O, that thesis we hadn't maxed out that. We haven't wrung out every single juice that we could have. And I think we switched too fast. Like, okay, like now let's do both, right? Without doing that. So I think there are a lot of kind of complexities when it comes to product management and building a business in general, right? Do you go after a different user? Do you go after the same user but solve different problems for them? Do you try to solve the same problem but start thinking about different solutions because you're not getting the kind of metrics that you want? How do you sequence the delivery of the solutions to them? Do you try to do a big bang? Hey, after 12 months in the mountain, we're going to come down and give you this wonderful solution? Or do we try to be more iterative on that? There are different complexities in making decisions on each of this point. Again, it's really contextual. And if you were asked, like, Isaac, do you have like a standard flow chart? I wouldn't say I do. I think I would say that there are principles that you must abide by. And sometimes it's a matter of degrees of which principle is more important at a particular time and context. Yeah. So I feel like product management is one of those things where you study a lot by looking at case studies as well. There isn't like a mathematical formula. You have to look at case studies and then evaluate whether those case studies apply to the problem at hand. Yeah.
I don't know about this, but as a product manager myself, and I've done quite a lot of products like the SAM machine, the pop station, all the drone delivery stuff. I thought about, in some sense, when you think about product management, is think about how to put different things in it to try to put them. You want to have the product to give that one straight line to the user experience. And then there is all this zigzag stuff that's internal operations, internal things. How does it all get together to give you that one unifying experience? And one question I do have, and this is where I want to come back to what you just said. How do you actually handle feedback and iteration when a product doesn't initially meet expectations? And what's the rationale for doubling down and not doubling down? The problem with what I observe with a lot of founders is that they try to scale too quickly rather than taking the time to work out exactly when to scale. And I know that because when I was working in Amazon, and I really learned this the hard way, that actually you don't need to scale so quickly. You should take your time to figure out the initial go-to market for a product. And once you get it, it doesn't matter. It will just auto generate that exponential curve you're looking for.
Yeah. It goes back to what I shared earlier, right? Our job as product managers is to deliver to the right group of users. You could say that's your total addressable market or whatever. Rather solve the right problems for the right group of users with the right solutions at the right time. Now, you got to know when something is failing in terms of your metrics. Is it because it is the wrong solution? Or is it the wrong problem? Or is it the wrong users? You shouldn't even go after these users. You have no right to be servicing these users, right? The company doesn't have core competency, or the founders are not the right founders. There's no founder market fit or whatever. And you got to then identify which one. And I think sometimes it's a matter of intuition, whether you are messing it up at the solution level, the problem level, or the market level. I think there's a little bit of intuition there. There isn't like I think a golden ratio of some magic number that you look at and go, aha, this is confirmed the wrong problem, but it's the right user, or this is confirmed the wrong solution, but it is the right problem. I think there's a gun, but one of the qualities of a great product manager, and I guess a great founder, is intuition. And the ability then to use metrics, quantitative metrics, and then qualitative, data points and everything else to either invalidate or validate their intuition. Like, I think just relying on intuition is insufficient. But not having intuition, I don't think you can succeed. And so that's when you know where you are along the part that you are not doing well.
Then there's the other part that I think a lot of people don't talk about. I think because we see at different scales of which product management for different parts of the company, right? How does the experience of, say, scaling shaped how you think about product management from a startup to a scale up? Today, Shopback, as in, we're not talking about Shopback's product, but we're talking about, like, in Shopback, it's like a scale up, right?
Yep.
And then some of the early stages when you did Honestbee, also at first it was a startup, then it became a scale up because you need to go through 8 countries, right?
Yeah.
And what is your framework in thinking about product management at that kind of switch of skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing I would say, and I think this is something my current company is learning, and we are making this transition, is that you cannot mirror your organization structure into your product. And that would be a mistake. There needs to be a transformation layer. And I'll give you an example what that means, right? The online and offline business is fairly different. The merchants that you engage with, how the engagement model, the merchants, the billing functions, the distributions, they're all fairly different. So just do something very similar, a simple merchant acquisition. You have an offline merchant acquisition team and an online merchant acquisition team. Just because you're structured to coordinate those engagements with the merchants and delivering the rewards to the users are done by business units, because you have different P&L, you have different compensation structures or whatever, doesn't mean on your app you show 2 business units. So if you think about it, a company like that sells shoes, they can have both an offline component where they have a physical retail store at maybe more like in one of the heartlands, and they also have a .com, right? Their name. It doesn't mean you separate it into 2 different parts of the app to sell the offline and offline rewards just because your business units are separated. You got to make sure that you hide all that complexity of how you organize your business and then bring it into the mental model of the user, which in this case could be a single page where you talk about the brand and then show where you can buy it from, online and offline, and what are the different propositions of buying it online and offline. So you got to master organizational complexity. Now, what happens is when you start out as a small company and it's a small team and it's only one business unit, you don't really have to think about this masking and transforming, because I only sell one thing. It's only a few of us, right? So that's it, right? It's a single button, go and click, it's done. But as organization grows and we try to do this one-to-one, the users get really confused. So that masking and wrapping it up is important. The second thing about it is that your products actually now all need to move at different speeds, and you have the ability to move the product at different speeds because the damage of failure is different at different points. And so then you need to ask yourself, when you talk about it, what does it take to deliver the product to the user, right? And I'll do a very simple model. In my current company, the internal users have to create campaigns and create offers. Then we would have to figure out how to personalize it. And then we have to figure out the visual representation of it to the user, right? So something very similar you do. And it's a bit of like, in the early stage of the transitions, all types of products along this delivery of the service to the user happens at the same speed. Okay, guys, let's do 2-week sprints. At the end of every sprint, let's deliver something, or let's do quarterly roadmaps. At the end of a quarter, we release something, and every part of it gets released at the same cycle. But it doesn't make sense. It's actually a smiling curve, and this is a new concept I think I learned from one of your former folks that you interviewed as well. And sorry, I don't want to.
You're probably talking about Tom Lee, the former chief product officer of Twitch, I think.
It's this smiling curve concept, right? Which is that things operate at different points at the chart based on the where you are in the delivery, right? And so things that are more user facing, right? If you have implemented A/B testing, gated releases, progressive releases, you really can be moving a lot faster. And you should, because you don't really know what the user wants. You want to put it inside there and then measure, right? So you can move a lot faster there. And today with the latest technology, you can really deploy changes to the app and the web really, really fast. Now, the things that are working internally for your internal users, a few bucks here and there, it doesn't really matter. It's inconvenient. You got to fix it fast. You got to fix it fast, right? You don't fix it after 2 weeks because they need to do the work tomorrow. So that happens a lot faster. But the core part at the center, the personalization engine, the making sure that for us, our cashback rates are accurate and precise and delivered on time. And when the user makes the transaction, we give the cashback accurately. That moves a lot slower, but that's also because it's core, right? So it's a bit like this. At the sites, you can move very fast. At the beginning, when you prepare what you want to show to the user and when you show, and then at the core, that moves a lot slower in the middle. And I think when you transition from a startup to scale up, you got to understand where your product sits inside there. You got to put the right people with the right mental models of delivery, because some people are very good at core stuff. Don't put them at the edges. Some guys really want to keep shipping every day. Don't put them at the core. And so you got to understand your team and so and everything else, where the product line sits. And I think that is one type of complexity you have to handle in both managing your organization and your product mix as you move from a startup to a scale up.
How would you approach, say, the creation and refinement of a product strategy in such a fast-paced environment? I think you alluded to a very good point, which I like about is there are people who are actually on the two edges of that U-shaped curve. And then there are people who are suitable to actually be the one delivering and ensure that the infrastructure doesn't break.
Yeah.
In order to support what's on the front line. Yeah. How would you think about the refinement of the product strategy? Because you also have a CEO to report to, right? Or maybe even a chief product officer sometimes, depending on the organizational construct that you are operating in.
Yeah. So I'll share this. It's not easy, especially if your current leadership is all the original founders, because in the beginning everything moved fast and everything moved at the same speed. I think there needs to be a lot of education to say that the company has reached a certain size where different things will move at different speed. The mistake is to make everything move at a slow speed. And introduce process and anything else. That's the worst. Then your company, I think, will inevitably die. The mistake as well is to move everything at a faster speed, because honestly, certain things, once you reach a certain size, you really cannot mess up. Personal information is one, right? You don't want to do something that eventually leaks it. That cannot. Certain companies wouldn't survive that kind of leaks. So you got to then educate that different parts of the product must move at different speeds. And to be honest, there's a lot of education and repetition. And then you basically construct roadmaps that are sequenced differently, that the deliveries of each part of it are very different. And you got to educate again and again and again. One thing that I'm starting to also constantly remind myself, and to be honest, as a senior practitioner in this space, I also forget about it sometimes, is that not everyone shares the same context as us who are builders. It doesn't mean that they're idiots or they're malicious or incompetent or whatever. It just means they don't have the same shared context. And a big part about senior leadership in product especially, unfortunately, is not to problem solve. Someone reminded this to me today. It's not our job to problem solve. It is part of our job, but it's not our only job. Our job is to create a shared context with other parts of leadership so that they can problem solve together with us and understand what is the reason why we are problem solving in a certain approach. And in this case, like you say, move at different speeds, rearrange the organizations and put it like that. And a big part of that is education. And so a big part of it is communicating clearly, consistently, and really just refining to make sure that the person on the other side understands the message and understands this specifically.
So what do you believe then are the most critical skills for a product manager today who just started out? And how would you say you probably have young aspirational product managers that come to you and say, Isaac, I want to become what you do today, right?
Yeah.
How would you foster these skills within these younger people?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm not sure we have enough time to do it. There's enough time to do it without slides. The mental model I have is a product manager growth framework that is adapted from a few sources. Intercom is one of the sources. I think Intercom, if you search online, they have a fairly robust framework on thinking about this. Intercom, they are a communication company, or rather a SaaS. I really shouldn't try to market them, but Intercom, they're famous enough. You Google them, they have a fairly decent, reliable framework. And what I've done is adapted it. It is, in my opinion, that if you're starting out, you must be strong in a few functional skills. And I've bucketed them into 7. The non-negotiable functional skill that every product manager must be good at is at project management. I think that's really important. Then there are 6 other skills. You must at least have one of the other 6. You must be either very technical, good in design, good in BD, good in sales, good in marketing, or good in data analysis. You must start with one of the 6. Then as you increase in seniority, you deepened your competency in each of the functional skill sets, and you broaden the functional skills that you have in your toolkit. Non-negotiable is project management. Not saying that product managers are project managers, but it is an important skill set. As you become more senior, I use the word softer skills, but because they're actually very, very difficult, but the softer skills matter. Your ability to pattern recognize, to abstract problem statements, to repackage them and to distill them and package them so that other people can understand. Conflict resolution, escalations, negotiations, all those things, evangelism, influence, those things become a lot more important as you become senior. But as a product manager starting out in your career, the functional skill sets are the most important, I think.
So if I ask you, being technical, non-technical, which is better? I have a very strong opinion that technical product managers are better than non-technical product managers.
That's an excellent question. It goes back to the first point I made, Bernard, that it really depends on the company and the founders. It really depends on the company and the founders and who your consumers are. If you are building a platform SaaS where it's API based, I do think that being technical is fairly important. In a company like my current company, where it's a lot of it is, there's a fair amount of it that's consumer facing, I do believe that you can survive and actually thrive without being technical if you're very strong on design, very strong on marketing, and your data analysis skills are there, right? So that you can pull out the metrics yourself, you can analyze it, and you can slice and dice it. I don't need you to fully understand all the different languages and everything and all those things. Now, what I share with my PMs is that not being strong in technical doesn't mean you are weak in technical. You must know enough such that it doesn't kill your career, but it doesn't mean that you need to. It's a matter of degrees, right? How much do you need to know? You need to know enough such that your career doesn't get jeopardized or impeded, or retarded. The progression is retarded because of this. It has to be at least at a certain baseline. But I think we can't be reductive to say that every product manager must be super technical. If you're not, your chances of succeeding against a technical one is less. It really depends on the problem space and the company and the founders. Yeah.
I actually look at it in a different spectrum. Yeah. I think of it in terms of non-technical product managers are very flexible. They become too flexible that they don't know what the product is. A technical product manager is extremely structured and has a certain systems at play, and tries to be as efficient as possible. But the problem is they couldn't sell the efficiency or be flexible enough to know when to change it. Yeah. So these are the strengths and also the weaknesses. And a good product manager is one that straddles between these two, this flexibility and this structuredness.
Yeah. I suspect there's a certain grain of truth in what you just shared. And also I suspect that the reason why I said this is going to be a much longer conversation and you need a deck is that it's very hard to have this kind of conversations. And I think this is really on me when I introduce my framework, is that I didn't share the definitions of each of the 7 functional skill sets I meet, right? And then we assume that we both have the same idea of the word technical. So if I say Bernard is technical, and I was right, say there's a product manager A, and if Bernard says that person is technical and I say that person is technical, there's an assumption that we mean the same thing. And so one of the things that's part of the growth framework is the definition of this functional skills. And so when we say someone is scoring high on the technical capability, what does that mean? And that's part of the growth framework. So, and I think we both probably agree. It's just that our terms are not fully aligned because we may not have the same mental model of the terms. And I think as part of product management, we should actually have gotten the terms aligned first.
No, wait. That comes to my next point, right? Which is what I want to talk about, which is something that I actually learned from that lecture that you gave in my class, and about the concept of distance. Right. And I didn't really appreciate this until I was listening to a talk. And I think the beauty of being a new startup founder is everything is a blank slate for me. I'm relearning everything again, right? But maybe we could take this opportunity to do 2 things. Define what we say is the product management, which is what you and I think we know what the baseline is. Right. And then at the same time, describe the concept of distance between teams from different cultures, different functions, and different perspectives.
Yeah. There is an excellent Harvard Business Review article about it. I think if I remember the title, it's called Why Distance Matters. This idea about distance in doing product management work was adapted from reading that article. And so what I would suggest is that use one of your, I think it's still free for 1 hour. You have 3 free articles for a period of time.
Send me the link and then I will also put it on the show notes for them to read. Yeah.
It's a great article. And I think it's worth reading about it. It didn't come from a product management perspective, and so I adapted it. But distance matters, and so so just for the listeners, in my mind, there are 3 types of distance. There is the social network distance from the founders. There is the time distance from the start of the company, and then there's the geographical distance from regional or HQ, or where most of the decision matters. And that distance, both physical and also mental in a sense, matters in creating alignment and allowing the company to move in the same direction autonomously and allow decisions to be made, I would say, more effectively, if not faster. So the most obvious distance is time, right? Because time, all of us experience it. It moves in a straight line. And so the company starts, let's say, in 2010, now it's 2024. There is going to be a distance. And what happens then is that when that knowledge gets lost because of that, assumptions change because of that, and sometimes people get frozen in time, or sometimes people don't understand what happened in the thing because, and that leads to suboptimal decisions. It's the same thing with geography, right? Physical geography, but there's also a concept of cultural distance, and physical geography creates the situation where cultural differences happened. And the example I gave is that language is also culture, right? And so language informs how you think. And so I think the example I gave during Bernard's class is that when you see two people speaking from different cultures and using the same language, you cannot assume that the information being sent is 100% not distorted and it all arrives and it's not lost, right? You can't. And actually, a lot of translations are happening. So, simple example, when someone speaking Mandarin speaks to someone that grew up in Vietnam, for example, speaking Vietnamese, they speak in English because that's how our company operates in, right? But the Vietnamese, and I sense check this with them, they think in Vietnamese. Some of them, not all, some of them now start to think in English, but they think in Vietnamese. Then they have to translate it into English. They say it out. The Taiwanese listens to it in English. Now they think in Mandarin, so they have to translate it. Then now they have to translate it back. Along the way, information gets lost, gets distorted, gets transformed, mutates, and everything else. And then once that happens, right, two people are looking at the same thing, but they are understanding the problem very differently. They are also understanding the solutions very differently. And that creates situations where there's misunderstanding, misalignment in how to implement something. And distance matters in a sense, right? And that's why they say birds of a feather flock together, because sometimes it becomes a lot more efficient to share context and move forward. So as you expand your footprint regionally and everything, not even just talking about tech, right? Local marketing teams and everything else, the ability to bridge that distance, both in mental models and physical distance and understanding what's happening on the ground is super key. Then the last one is distance from the founders, right? In the early time, everyone just works with the founding team. But as you go wider, the connections are not really there. Information gets distorted and lost and everything else. And yeah, so distance matters. We don't always think about how to reduce distance, but actually I think while we may not be thinking about the concept so much, we do it, right? Town halls, writing memos, Amazon's press releases that you all write. It's all about trying to really shorten that distance. And so I think the concept is interesting. And I think it's worth sharing so that people are aware of it. But the tactics to reduce it, I think a lot of us are doing it. Now the question is how to be more deliberate about doing it and why we are doing it. Yeah.
Why I thought it was interesting, I don't know whether you thought about this, that the implication of distance is also somehow shows up on how you think about distributed and remote teams. So
yeah.
let me think about why I thought it was why it was insightful for me to understand it. Because if I want to build a company that's fully remote, correct? Then the question is, how do I shorten those distance? And because I need different teams at different geographies in order to align that. I think there are two questions that come about this part, right? One is, how do you align them? What's the strategy to align them to the same context? That's one. You already said that there are certain methods used by a different company culture. I agree with you. I think Amazon uses a narrative almost to actually force everyone to converge into something that contextually everybody understands.
Yep.
And users also, I think the other thing that probably very few people realize is the leadership values.
Yeah.
I don't think of Amazon as like a company with culture X. No, it's actually operate a little bit more like a DAO, where in order to get resources from another team, I need to use the values to persuade and explain to them why they should work with me. And then we work together to achieve those common goals.
Yeah. I'll say this, and I'm not so sure whether we are the exception or the norm. My current company didn't start out as a hybrid or remote company, right? We started out very much in-person, face-to-face company, right? COVID struck, and I think it accelerated this concept of hybrid, and some companies have gone on full remote. Navigating this transition is extremely tough, in my opinion. Because you got to hire people who can work remote or hybrid from day one. If you have hired for people and built a company culture and structure that works for face-to-face, that transition is very, very tough. Even if you can transition the structure, you may not be able to transition the human. And not just talking about the human terms of a character, right? Some people are more disciplined than others. Some people are able to focus. but the individual must also have the requisite skill sets to live in the environment. And I'll give you one example. The ability to write well is almost non-negotiable in a hybrid/remote environment. And I'm not so sure all of us write at the level that can allow efficient coordination for hybrid and remote teams.
That's not even with ChatGPT.
I think ChatGPT helps. But ChatGPT is limited by its training set. And I've tried ChatGPT. It works to a certain degree, but you can't just use it by itself. And to be honest, when you use ChatGPT, you have to do editing. Editing is even harder than writing.
Unless you do it in the reverse, which is what I do. I write out everything first because I already have a certain narrative I want to push. I just ask ChatGPT to help me to rewrite in different variations.
Yes.
In order to see whether I can communicate the message better. I use it more like a brainstorming board rather than actual like cut and paste, which is I think what a lot of people are doing.
You're right. So that's another approach, right? But then that's a very editorial approach if you think about it. You're really communicating with someone else to help craft a finer message. And there's a bit of judgment because ChatGPT doesn't know who you're communicating with. Then the question then is how now, while you may not need to write well to your final end audience, you must know how to write well and communicate well to the machine. You must be able to prompt well. And that's another form of literacy. Not super easy. I would say that I'm learning, and I'm probably struggling as well, how to communicate with a machine and get the kind of outputs and outcomes I want, right? And so that's another form, and that's grounded in writing and editing. So I think it's almost a skill set that many of us do not have. The younger generation might have it because they grew up in a different environment, but there are late 30s, early 40s, 50s people doing this transition. It's not going to be easy. And so I think you almost have to really start from scratch and say, like from day one. If not, the transition stage is harder, in my opinion. Yeah.
So if I were to ask you now, if you think about how has your leadership style changed and how has it evolved? Because you talk about this concept of distance, which I thought can be used for a lot of other things, and how I'm trying to build a company being fully remote. And that's one of the things that really struck me when I was listening to that talk you gave. And then also the other question that was really on my mind was, how do you build and maintain a cohesive product team? Because there's times, whether it's a startup scale or even become a mature company, in times of high pressure and significant change.
Yeah. I think this one, right? I think one of your former companies is Amazon is someone that I take a lot of inspiration from. While we may not have at the end of the day the same values, right? Because contextually is different. The idea of a value system to me is super important, because I think having values and principles, if we assume that we've hired the right folks in terms of character and sincerity and wanting to build the right business, and they are baseline competent and reliable, then given the same set of values, you assume that our decisions will converge. Where it may differ, it might differ in a matter of preferences or taste. But at least I think in the general direction, we are similar. So I think at the end of the day, and this is something that I think I shared during your session as well, the job of leadership at the end of the day is to make decisions. And I don't think this is a new concept. I think even Amazon was the one that articulated. The job of leadership is to make decisions, and you got to improve your decision-making ability, right? More right than wrong. And you make decisions based on information and your ability to process that information. So what happens is leadership then really makes, and my job is to create alignment, to make sure that I collect information from my team that are the notes, and make sure that I pass it on to my CEO and my C-suites. But I make sure that I take their information, translate it, and also pass it down without losing the meaning, but reframe it in a different way, because I understand how my teams process information, and so I have to reframe it so that they absorb it easier. And then make sure that they have enough information to make the decisions with the same set of values and frameworks that we have. And so it's about training folks to make decisions, right? So two things: training folks to collect information, and then training folks to use that information to make decisions. And there are different frameworks for making decisions, and it really depends on what is the decision you want to make. But if you think about this is also what the product manager does. The product manager needs to go out and do user interviews, we do surveys, we are looking at metrics, we are collecting information, and then we're also using that information to make decisions. And depending on whether you're changing a UI UX or whether you're introducing a new feature, the decision-making frameworks are different. Product managers very much are doing what a lot of leadership folks are doing, collecting information, transmitting information, figuring out how to make decisions more efficiently and effectively. Yeah. And so that's my job.
I'm going to just add, because this conversation is getting interesting, and I'm just going to caveat to, because I worked in Amazon previously, there are two things about our leadership values that I think a lot of people don't realize. Number one, the leadership values are all contradicting each other.
Yes.
And certain people, I think, took the wholesale, but didn't realize that frugality actually contradicts something like dive deep. Okay, bias for action contradicts some other things, right?
Yeah.
Insists on high standards. Okay, so there's contradiction. So picking the right set of values for different situations is very important. So that's number one. Number two is that the leadership principles, actually only certain principles work when you are on the ground level. That means you are incoming associate, and you started working in a company since after graduation, and then certain set of values work when you are a middle level person, and then certain set of values are actually very important if you want to go all the way up to the top. I think people don't see the distance between all those sets of values and just lump it one lump sum, take it on there. I don't know whether this is, I'm probably sorry about riffing about this, but I just try to take the opportunity to actually explain the context of the leadership values, because when people tell me that they adopt Amazon values, I just need to ask 3-4 questions and I probably know whether they're just copying it or they just don't understand the context of it.
Yeah. I think, you know, when I first read the book where I think the values was shared, I use it very much as a checklist. I say, okay, am I following this value? Right? And then it was like a typical Asian must score full marks. I must tick all.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like 100 marks. I got everything. But you're right. I've come to learn that it's not a checklist. Again, it's very contextual. You got to use the right value for the right decision at the right time, right? And the right time depends on your stage of your career or where you exist in the wider organization or where you exist in the problem space and solution space. So one of the big parts of being a product manager and a founder and a leader is the ability to hold multiple conflicting ideas in your head and to be able to understand them and effectively debate both of them. And you have to be very comfortable with this discomfort, because a human being having multiple conflicting ideas in their head is actually very uncomfortable. It's very painful, right? A lot of times life is a lot simpler if you hold on to a single idea, single concept, and just never give it up, right? But when you want to hold multiple ideas and you can even understand both sides of the argument, everything else, this is very, very painful. But I'm not saying that you dwell on it. If you dwell on it, then you get paralyzed and everything else. Sometimes you need to know, okay, this time, this is the idea that I need, I'm going. But you must be able to understand all the different arguments that are being made and stuff. But a big part of product management, I think, startup founder leadership, anything else, is the ability to be comfortable in that discomfort. And it's not easy, I would say. At least in my own perspective.
So I'm going to ask you, given you talk about having multiple things at one go, so how do you actually balance your professional growth with your personal interests like stand-up comedy?
Okay. So I enjoy creating. I'm a software engineer by training. I was going to tell a very poor joke, but I'm going to ask, what do you call a failed software engineer? You call him a product manager. It's a lame. I apologize to your audience. I was a software engineer by training, and I like to create. In my free time, I go for hackathons to build stuff, right? I find that stand-up comedy is an outlet for me for creation. It's my outlet. Other folks may cook, other folks may paint. Stand-up comedy is mine because I enjoy words. I enjoy writing, and I enjoy delivering those words. And I also really enjoy it. There is a sense of validation when you can make someone laugh, right? Some of us make our spouses laugh, make our kids laugh, and we are okay with that level of validation. For some reason, I need to go on stage and make strangers laugh, and I find great joy in that, right? But it's an outlet for creativity. It's my outlet. Now, how do I balance it? I find that when you build certain muscles in your brain, it translates. And so the ability that being comfortable with that discomfort of writing, presenting it to your audience, measuring the response, whether it's a laughter or groans, and then feeding it back to your writing and presenting. That cycle is the product management cycle. Build, measure, learn. Build, measure, learn. So ours is write, present, laughter, no laughter, go back. I feel like when you build comfort in that process in one domain, it makes it easier to, or rather it helps adopt that process or similar processes in other domains. And so that's one way of doing it. That's one way I converge. One way converges, yeah.
So I probably want to ask you, so you took a break, and I think just now in the career story, you already talk about, you did spend some time performing stand-up comedy, I think from Asia to Europe, and then with some achievements. I think it's best for you to tell us what happened, because one interesting thing, I think this happens for a lot for Singaporeans, and this is a Singaporean contextual. It tends to be, I think you only headlined very recently in Singapore, but maybe you should talk about what you did before that. And then, Singapore has this problem of we have to do very well outside of Singapore, and then it translates backwards on there.
I'm not so sure whether that situation applies to me, but you're right. I recently did headline at the Lemon Stand, which is a comedy club in Singapore at Queen Street. I think I hope I'm not getting.
Yes, I was there.
I couldn't headline in that place earlier because that's a fairly new club, right? But you're right. It was the most recent headline. What I did was, as I was traveling from Singapore to London, I performed in the cities along the way. So I performed in KL, Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh, Hanoi, perform in China, Beijing, a bunch of other places there. So perform in St. Petersburg, perform in Estonia, Warsaw, Poland, everything else. Right? And I did it because I wanted to travel for the sake of traveling. But I think as a typical Singaporean, I wanted to achieve something at the end. And I set it in my mind that I wanted to win this amateur competition in the UK, where it's basically called King Gong. You go up, you tell jokes for like 5 minutes. And if you don't get gong off, and you get gong off when three audience members raise a red card. And once there's 3, you're out. So like 3, 3, 3, you're out. To be honest, I got into the final round by a very small margin because 2 people had already raised the card. And like, I think someone was about to raise the third one, and then the time was done. I survived and I went to the final round, and eventually I won because the audience supported me. I practiced the same set with obviously adjustments and modifications along the way, because I wasn't sure whether my jokes and my stories as a Singaporean would resonate with a foreign audience, and I wasn't sure whether my delivery would resonate with it. And so I had to practice and tweak. And what I found out is it does. I think there are certain themes about family and spouses and certain themes about life that resonates. The language might be different, but it resonates. And so, yeah.
So translating life lessons into jokes then.
A lot of us try to make sense. A lot of part about being a human is to make sense of the world. And we make sense of the world in different ways. Some of us keep journals, some of us paint, some of us, I don't know. But for me, I make sense of the world by making jokes. Some of the jokes are extremely dark, so you can't tell them on stage. They're very morbid sometimes. I think as a personal friend, you might hurt some of them. But it's to translate it because that's how I deal with the world. That's how I make sense of it. Humor is my way of making sense of the world. Yeah.
And that will comes to my traditional closing question then. What does great product management look like from your point of view?
Wow. It's very different from what I think a great product manager is, right? It's 2 different questions. Do you see them as the same?
I don't see them as the same, but you can answer in both.
Well, to be honest, great product management, in my opinion, is solving the right problems for the right users with the right solution at the right time and achieving the business metrics that your company started out with, which could be customer acquisition, customer retention, being profitable, higher CLV, higher customer lifetime value, lower CAC, right? So that to me is great product management when you solve all of that, right? You got to get all the rights right. And then obviously if you get it all right, but it doesn't hit the metrics, then you're not really a great product manager, to be honest. And then you actually need to maybe say that actually some of the problems that I thought was right was actually wrong, and then I need to change, right? Because at the end of the day, at least in my context, we're running a business. Now, it could be that you get all of this and it's great product manager management outside of a business, then you look at different metrics, right? Like, does it spark joy and a bunch of other stuff, right? And so, but at least in the context of a business, it has to be linked up back to business metrics. Now, what does it take to get this? The best product managers, in my opinion, are excellent communicators. They are excellent communicators. The best product managers like to create. They learn different tools and skill sets to create, but they like to create. They are also historians. They know the history of their craft or whatever that domain that they choose to create. So for me, as a stand-up comedian, I must know the history of stand-up comedy, right? I don't just know who is the flavor of the month or this current year, but I know the history, right? If you like cooking, you know the history of the techniques that you're using and a bunch of stuff. So innately curious, I think. I think that comes from curiosity. And I think you can't be a great product manager if you're not curious, because then you won't want to know what other people think. What is the reason why they use your product in a certain way, or what's the reason why they don't use? So curiosity, student of history, a bunch of other stuff. But I know we're running out of time, so I'll focus on this. But I hope that answers your question.
That's a good answer. So it comes to my closing. So I probably have just two quick questions. Any recommendations which have inspired you recently?
You're talking about books?
Books, Netflix shows.
Wow. This is the book that I've been recommending everyone in my team to read. I suspect that most of your audience members would have heard it. It's called Never Split the Difference.
Yeah, okay, by Chris Voss.
Yeah, I think it's a great book, especially if you want to level up as in senior leadership. I think the ability to negotiate for anything is a key skill. So I'll recommend that book. I won't recommend a specific book or TV show, but I'll maybe recommend a specific approach. If you find that you're enjoying something a lot and you are learning a craft, dive into the history. What I've come to realize is that the folks that came before us that are doing the craft or in the space that we're in, a lot of times they also encountered the same problems, and they may have more interesting solutions that didn't survive because technology changes and assumptions changes. But sometimes I find that we go full circle. And there are things we can learn. I'll give an example.
Agree.
Yeah, I'll give an example, and it's a bit of a painful example because we recently announced that we shut down this business unit called Buy Now, Pay Later. But Buy Now, Pay Later is not new. In fact, it's not new in Singapore. You think about the big electronic stores in Singapore, we've always had Buy Now, Pay Later, right? We have. You go and buy a fridge at one of the big electronic stores, they'll give you 12 months, and they underwrite it themselves, or maybe they work with someone depending on how they structure it. But they're not new concepts. And I think there's a lot of things we can learn about how they went to market with their Buy Now, Pay Later product, right? And
interesting that you mentioned that, because I was explaining to my class in one of the first lecture was that if you look at all the consumer electronic stores in Singapore, they are not a commerce trading company. They're actually a financial engineering company. And then everybody contested it. That's like, then all I just said is, just look at how many different credit card machines that's on the table. And that's all the Buy Now, Pay Later mechanisms. But I think the Buy Now, Pay Later is able to route into the correct credit card on there, where they have to do it manually. So I agree with you on this one, actually.
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend a specific book, but I'll say specific approach, right? Read up about the history of your craft, the practitioners on it, the practitioners that played in the domain that you're interested in. I think there's a wealth of knowledge that we can obtain and maybe be inspired. Yeah.
How do my audience find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's my day job. I have an Instagram account called Isaac Tay Comedy, but that's my comedy account. Yeah, so that's the two.
I can put a link up.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, you can definitely find this podcast on all the channels, YouTube and all the podcast channels. And we have an Instagram and TikTok Reels. Subscribe to our newsletter. And of course, we will continue to have that conversation. Isaac, many thanks for coming on the show. And let's continue talking.
Thank you for having me, Bernard.